real sex actually looks like, and in terms of like real life sex, the kind of messy stuff that happens,
Your parents walking in.
So, right now on Graham and Nathan, we are joined by holistic sex educator Jenny Keane. Welcome to the show, Jenny.
Woo!
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes.
Now, Jenny, you're on because of a recent research carried out on behalf of Cialis has shown that nearly 3 in 10 Irish men have experienced erectile dysfunction, with 21% of men experiencing anxiety or pressure related to sexual performance, with the figure rising to 33% among men aged 18 to 34. When I read this, Jenny, I was very surprised. Do we know the reason behind these results?
Oh, do you know, well, first of all, I think what's absolutely amazing about these stats in particular is that they're based on the Irish public. So oftentimes when it comes to sex research, even for myself, I'd have to look to the UK, I'd have to look to America to try and find like, oh, these are the results. And results and stats are really important to sex education because oftentimes these topics can be really emotive. So having stats and having numbers and having figures can help people get into this logical headspace, which helps them like approach these issues, which can often be, very difficult for people to approach because they're sexual issues essentially. So I actually love that this is, done on Irish people themselves. And I mean, realistically, when it comes to something like erectile dysfunction, and when we talk about it particularly, with the figure that you're talking about with regards to 18 to 34-year-olds being a performance issue, this is such a big topic because what we see that sex, and particularly heteronormative sex, is really this idea that sex begins when the penis is erect and it ends when the penis when it isn't erect anymore, right? And so what happens then when there's this variability that often occurs in sexual experiences? And because one thing I want to say really clearly is performance variability when it comes to erection is actually not just common, it's the norm. So, but that isn't something that is really spoken about in the wider public. And, when it comes to things like what people are ingesting, the sexual scripts they're ingesting, they can start to see like, oh, this is what sex means. So what happens then when your penis might go a little bit soft, during sexual intimacy, or maybe you might lose your erection altogether. What does this mean for you? And I find as well that sometimes for men, it can be very difficult to even speak about these things because there's this idea that is attached to their sexuality, which is to do with their masculinity and how manly they are at the same time, if that makes sense. So it can be very difficult subjects to approach in order to get information.
So, Jenny, if you're somebody that has struggled in the past to achieve an erection, would you say to your partner, your new partner, oh, this has happened before with me? Is it clear should you be very open with communication from the get-go? Or do you think wait till it happens and then address it?
I think it's so dependent. So I always say like pleasure is such an individual experience. And also it really depends on what people are comfortable with. So what you would see is that, erectile dysfunction happens for many different reasons. Essentially, when we boil it down, to the kind of heart of the matter, it's really an issue with blood flow. So what we see things affecting, erections would be, your cardiovascular health. And, if we think about even today, we're living very sedentary lifestyles where we're sitting more and moving less. This may have an effect on the function, right, of your erection. We also have then issues with our pelvic floor, which is also part of the kind of erectile process where, people may experience a lot more tension in their pelvic floor or due to high stress levels. When we experience more stress, it actually pulls blood away from the parts of our body that we don't need, which, is our penis in one
Yeah.
part, and it sends it to different areas. So it totally depends when it comes to including your partner in the conversation. And one thing that I would always say though as well is that, even in this study, they said that one of the biggest issues that I think it was, 3 out of 10 men really struggle with having these conversations, or that there's a stigma around having these conversations with their partners and wouldn't include them in the conversation. And what happens is that when you don't include your partner in a conversation to do with sexual issues, it actually creates further disconnection and kind of a separateness when it comes to intimacy. And oftentimes people will start to, if it does happen, someone might be like, oh my God, I wonder, is that my fault? Do they not like me
Yeah.
anymore? Have I done something wrong? So there is this kind of a tendency to kind of ingest sexual issues as either shame, where it's, oh, this is my fault, there's something wrong with me, or else blame, like there's something wrong with you, this is your fault. And so when we actually learn how to have really good communicative issues with each other around sexual issues, it actually helps bring us closer together and create that form of connection, even if there is something wrong. And what I would always say is, when I talk to people about communicating with your partner around sexual issues, the one thing that you want to avoid is having these conversations in the bedroom. And the best thing that you can do is have that conversation outside the bedroom. To take it a step further, I always say, be moving at the same time. So whether you maybe have that conversation going for a walk or you're in the car driving somewhere, bring the conversation up then, because what happens is that sometimes the conversation can become so awkward that
Yeah.
the flow of the conversation stops. Whereas if you're walking or if you're driving, there's that natural flow of energy happening, and often helps the conversation to keep going.
Jenny, have these stats always been the same, or has the prevalence of pornography kind of led to these stats?
Yeah, do you know what? It's so hard to really go to one particular source, because there's a whole lot of issues that kind of combine. Definitely what we see with porn. And when we say porn, we're saying particularly mainstream porn that is freely available, because what you see with that type of porn is that it's very much focused on the extreme, right? So I always say, like, it's almost like watching a movie, right? There's these extreme angles, extreme caricatures, extremities are, enlarged, all parts of those
Oh, you're
extremities.
telling me. Oh my, Jenny.
You know,
Good
and
Lord,
what
they look nothing like me.
Well, like, that's the thing. It's really for, and ultimately the purpose of that type of porn is that it's meant to bring you to arousal quickly. So that's why you have this kind of extreme nature around porn. Well, also people don't understand that when they're watching something like this, that scene is probably shot over, a couple of different hours or a couple of days sometimes. So what you might not see is, that performer having the same kind of thing with, their erect losing their erection or their penis going soft. You don't see that, right? Because it's edited and cut. So what you see is a kind of a misrepresentation of what real sex actually looks like in terms of like real life sex, the kind of messy stuff that happens, the falling off the bed or whatever it is, you don't see those moments because they're all cut out,
Your parents walking in.
Oh God, get a lock on the door.
Jenny, are there
Simple
any
thing.
are there any benefits to porn? Because you hear so much of, it's so bad, expectations and everything. But are there any benefits?
I think the problem with porn is that and also the conversation around porn is that porn gets blamed for a lot of things. Porn isn't sex education. Porn isn't somewhere where you go if you do have a sexual issue to try and figure out what that is. It very much has this one particular purpose, which is entertainment. If you look at ethical sources of porn, sources where you actually pay and subscribe to porn sites, you can actually find a lot of benefits in terms of like audio porn or visual porn that might actually put female pleasure at the center. So you don't see this kind of, the idea of, I call it friction-based sex, which is like the
Yeah.
pounding, the slapping, everything's fast. It's not really very, caring or nurturing or even loving in any kind of way. Whereas if you look towards different sources of porn, you can actually find a lot of that available, where it does put female pleasure at its center, where it actually does show, what consent might look like in the bedroom, and also have conversations of consent modeled in those films. And you also as well would see sometimes, educational content within that film kind of within that film or cinematography as well.
Mm.
But really, those sources are ones that you have to pay for, and it's kind of the difference between paying for a subscription, like paying for movies versus just watching the stuff for free. There's a huge difference between the quality and the content that's being shot.
Jenny, I don't know if you would have an answer to this, but do you think this generation are having more sex now than our parents?
Actually, there is answers to this because there is data out there that suggests that this generation is having less sex than before. And actually, they even say that Gen Z is having less sex again than, let's say, the
Why is
millennials.
that?
Oh, I mean, have a look at the way we live in society. I mean, everything is about, there's this like, uh, it's kind of like the perfect storm to create disconnection, right? There's this idea of the productivity culture, which is that we have to, it's like this achievement addiction. So, like a focus on, pursuing and attaining goals at all costs. This is often to the detriment of our relationships, and even of our health, right? So think about the amount of time you might spend in work, the amount of time that you might spend sitting down versus with your family, or even, going for a walk or taking time to exercise or something like this. And then you look at then the cost of living, which often sees that both people in the household have to work.
Mm.
This is also, where people are spending more time outside. Then you also then have the huge, rise in people on their phones. And I suppose the addiction to things like social media. Like if you even think about, your own relationships, or if the people listening think about their own relationships, what is the last thing you're doing before bed? A lot of couples are in bed right before they go to sleep, scrolling on whatever it is, Instagram or TikTok or whatever it is, right before they go to sleep, where this is like a prime time where they could actually take the phones outside the bedroom and use that time to connect with each other. And instead they're, scrolling. That's disconnection, or it's spending passive time together. And then people are so stressed, they're, using ways that might be easy for them. So relaxing in front of Netflix. But, if you're thinking that you might be relaxing in front of Netflix, six nights, 5 nights a week, when is that time that you're actually actively connecting to each other,
Yeah.
And one of the things, when it comes to experiencing sexual issues, whether it's for men, like erectile dysfunction, or whether it's for women, like an inability to an orgasm or pain during sex, one of the main things that we see that causes sexual issues is a lack of emotional intimacy and physical closeness. And that comes about because of the way we're living in society. You really, in order to have a very good, intimate, close relationship, have to be very proactive in the sense that, you're choosing not to watch Netflix one night, and instead you're choosing to go for a walk together where you talk to each other, or you're choosing, to sit down and play a board game with each other, or, playing cards or something like this,
Bit of
that will
strip
stimulate.
poker or something to get you going.
That's it.
Yeah.
Well, in saying that, Jenny, would you recommend for people who are kind of caught up in this busy world to maybe schedule in, oh, on Tuesday we are going to have sex?
Yeah, do you know what? There is this idea in the world that, like, if sex isn't spontaneous, or if we're saying, like, oh, Jesus, now she's telling me to write in the diary, to put it in, with a little symbol in the diary, like that we're going to do it now, that there's this idea that you're going to, like, lose this kind of, spark or the kind of excitement behind it. But actually, if you think about anything that you plan, like whether you plan, dinner on Friday night, you call the restaurant ahead so you make sure you have the table. Most of the time we're looking at the menu so we know what kind of we want to order. And when we get to the restaurant, it doesn't actually take away from our experience. And the same thing when we plan holidays, we
Yeah.
might have like 3 or 4 days somewhere. We book the flights ahead, we book the hotel, we're not landing in the airport being like, where will we go now?
Yeah.
You have all that planned ahead. And actually it makes for that excitement and that anticipation, which is a really important ingredient when we translate that to sex. So actually planning sex in advance plans and saying, right, this is our date night, right? And this is what we're going to do. You can actually kind of curate this experience with your partner where it's like, well, what is it that you would like? Do you want to like maybe dress up, or do you want to go out somewhere and do something? And there can be this kind of build up, and then you might be able to text during the day about it. And that creates even more of that anticipation with each other. And, when you then actually experience, they always say, the best sex is planned, the best sex is you're preparing for it.
Yeah.
You've got the toys ready, you've got the lube ready, it's not this kind of scramble being like, oh no, the battery's not working, I have to charge this over here, the kind of way. So
Yeah.
often like when you kind of know like what it is that you want to do, and how it is you want to act, like it can actually create this huge excitement, with each other. And I'm a real advocate for planning sex, I have to say, for that reason. We're all so busy, like a lot of us have kids on top of that, or responsibilities to look after, other people. And this can be a time where you kind of put a boundary around it and say, right, this is our space. We're going to leave everything that we have to do outside of this space for the next 2 hours or however long it is, and enjoy this time together. Whether that is, penetrative sex or not. There's so many ways to be intimate with each other without, if you are experiencing sexual issues. And there's also ways to experience orgasm without even having an erection. So.
Jeez.
Now that's for another show.
That's for another show, yeah. Jenny, thank you so
great,
much.
Jenny.
So interesting,
Really
honestly.
appreciate it.
Create a roster, have a look. Is tonight going to be the night, or are there just a few gaps in the schedule and maybe it's pushed to the following week?
Holistic sex educator Jenny Keane, thank you so much for joining us and giving us an insight into erectile dysfunction and also sex. Cheers, Jenny.
Thank you.